Okay, colleagues, we will take a start and welcome to this afternoon's Education, Children and Young People's Executive and the first of the new council. Just also to note that the functions of this executive is now being extended and will include part of leisure and sport, and there is discussion ongoing about the future name of the executive rather than continuing to add in additional words to the title to make it a bit more unwieldy. But welcome to everybody this afternoon, and I'll ask Mr Moody if we have any apologies.
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies from one of the representatives from Craig, both parent representatives, Beryl Stevenson.
Okay, thank you for that, and hopefully as we have a timetable of meetings that will be able to allow others to be able to join us. I'll now ask if there are any declarations of interest in relation to any item on the agenda today. No indications. Thank you. And the item 3 is a minute of the meeting of the executive on the 29th of March. Again, there will only be a few who will have been members of that particular committee, but if those that were there, if we can indicate that this is a true record. Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. Thank you, folks. Are there any particular matters arising from that? I suspect there may not be, but just a brief opportunity for people if there is anything. No. Okay. Moving on to item 4, which is a rolling action log, and I'll ask Mr Moody to take us through that.
Yes, thank you, Convener. And again on the agenda, this is the opportunity just for members to have an update on any particular items that have been requested for report by previous meetings of the Education, Children and Young People Executive. So there is an expected reporting date, and the comments will either be to say whether it's in progress, why it's not been received by the point originally anticipated, or whether, as in one case, the report is on today's agenda. There is an opportunity for members to ask questions in relation to any of these items, but otherwise it's simply for noting.
Okay, thank you, Colin. I'll open it up for any questions in relation to any of the items within the rolling action log if there's further information required. Councillor Nimmo?
Just a quick question, Convener, in relation to 522. I wonder if Gary could maybe confirm whether or not we currently have resources to take this forward.
Gary?
Thanks, Convener. I'm just checking what 522 is just now. Give me a second. Papers.
Gary, if it assists, it's the item on Gaelic medium education.
In terms of any capital that's been set aside to take forward Gaelic medium education, there's no capital certainly being set aside in the current Council's capital programme, Councillor Nimmo. In terms of other resources that we have are purely related to the ring fence money, which applies to the expansion of the early years sector to deliver the 140 hours. And I would have to say that whilst there may be some money in there that could be freed up when we get to the end of the project, there is no funds specifically being set aside to progress anything to do with Gaelic medium education in the early years sector anyway. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gary. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions in relation to the rolling action log? No, I'm happy to agree. Okay, moving on to item 5, and it is the membership of the Education, Children and Young People's Executive, and I'll go to Mr Moody.
Thank you, Convener. This is a report which comes to this committee each time there is a local government election, just to set out the wider membership of the Education Committee within the local authority. And we have a number of categories of additional members, one of which is mandatory for the council to have as members, and others which the council has decided over the years to add to the committee to widen the stakeholder group taking part in the deliberations at these meetings. So if we could begin perhaps with the mandatory category, and that's the requirement, which is a statutory requirement, to have 3 religious representatives as part of the committee. And one of those is nominated by the Church of Scotland, one by the Roman Catholic Church, and the other is drawn from a third category, which requires to be determined by the authority having regard to the comparative strength of churches and denominational bodies in the area. And based on previous census results, the category which has the largest representation after Church of Scotland and the Roman Catholic Church is a more general category of Christian other. And in the case of this council, the nomination has fallen on the basis of that to a representative of the evangelical churches, who thus far has been the Reverend Rollo. As the report notes, Reverend Rollo is prepared to serve again, and the recommendation is that he is given the opportunity to do that, and you're invited to appoint him to the committee. But we do note in the report, as we're all aware, that we've just filled in a census return. There will be census statistics will become available in coming years during the life of the council, and there'll be an opportunity for the council to reconsider whether the general category, which is represented by the Reverend Rollo, is the right one to proceed with. But my recommendation at the moment is that we continue to do so, pending and hearing what those census figures tell us. The wider categories include teacher representatives and parent representatives, and we have 2 of each. There is a process which will need to be undertaken to identify teacher representatives and parent representatives for the remainder of the council term, but you're invited to reappoint the existing representatives in the meantime until that process is complete, and that ensures there's an opportunity to hear the voice of teachers and parents in your deliberations. You're also asked to reappoint Mrs. Santos as the care experienced young person, and that's reflecting the wider remit of the committee, crossing all of children's services and not just for education functions, also in the role of the council as a provider of children's social work services. We also have 2 school students represented on the committee, and the current arrangement is that shifts each academic year from one high school to the other. We're drawing to the close of the current academic year, and the current representatives are Charlotte Clem and Cameron Simmons, but there will be new representatives to join the committee when we come to August. So, Convener, the recommendations which arise from that are firstly to appoint Reverend Rollo as a voting member for the remainder of the council term, to appoint Isa Santos as the care experienced young person, again for the same term, and to continue the appointment of the parent and teacher representatives until their replacements have been identified. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Colin. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to Colin for outlining that. I'm happy to move the recommendations within the report, and I look forward to working with everybody over the course of the coming term. I hope I'm not jinxing this, but having been a member of the committee over the past term, although this is my first as Education and Leisure portfolio holder, it's generally been a very constructive committee and able to come to consensus on matters in terms of progress in education and the well-being of our wider citizens. So while a reflection of that is undoubtedly down to the hard work of officers, it would be remiss of me, I think, not to take this opportunity to say I think it's also been down to the passion and energy of the previous portfolio holder, Adana McHugh, and the positive impact, insight and commitment that she showed. It'll be a very hard act to follow. I think, it's good that the external reps have definitely added value to our proceedings, not just because the Reverend Rollo is a fellow Stenhousemuir season ticket holder. I think we're verging on a majority with additional members. But as Colin was pointing out there, I think this is going to be the last committee for Charlotte and Cameron, who had perfect timing in joining the meeting there as a people representatives before it passes on to the next school in the rotation. So I think also an opportunity to thank them for their contributions, which have been very insightful at times, particularly on their the impression that they've had of the mental health issues during COVID and assessment models. So I'm sure they're nervous about their exam results, but they've worked very hard, and I take this opportunity to thank them for their contribution and wish them well, and obviously all of our students well, but happy to move the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Colley?
Just happy to second, reserve the right.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to any member if there are any questions or comments you would wish to make. James?
Hi, it's just on the point of the religious representatives. Whilst I know that the Church of Scotland and the Catholic Church have reserved places, all three nominations are Christian, and the demographics are pretty clear that we are becoming a less Christian country with a growth in Judaism and Islam, as well as no faith as well, so freedom of religion or belief. And with that demographic change, it is just questioning if it is appropriate and representative for all three to be Christian, and that's not recognising the good work that Reverend Rowe has done in his position.
Colin?
I think my short answer to that would be, at this stage, yes. And on the basis of the census results, which are the ones available to us, the Christian other group that I was referring to does represent the third largest group reflected in the population as then measured. But I think, as noted in the report, there will be an opportunity to think about that again when we have the results of the 2022 census. It may be that the position has changed then, and there's no requirement that all three representatives need to be drawn from Christian traditions. So there's at least one other Scottish local authority I can think of who has a third representative drawn from another group. So in that case, it's from Judaism. So that would be an option open to the council, but I think it would be difficult to say that that is the correct or necessary thing to do at this stage before we hear the most recent census results. Thank you.
Councillor Nimmo?
Thanks, Convener. Colin, it's another question along the same sort of lines. I'm just wondering, I'm just using this as an example, do we know how many Muslim pupils we currently have in Falkirk schools?
The short answer is I don't know that. I don't know if it's something that Mr. Naylor would know more of.
Robert, are you able to?
No, it would be the short answer. We do know about the ethnicity of our pupils, but as to their faith group, that's not something that I would have access to, I don't think.
Okay, thanks, Convener.
Okay, if there are no further questions or comments? Are they happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 6, and it's the end of schools PPP contract, and it's, I think it's Mr. Naylor that's going to take that. Or is it Gary? Are you taking that one?
I'm taking this one, convener, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of the report is outlined in section 1. There's 4 key aims outlined in section 1 to give information on the report. However, the key decision that's needed is outlined in section 1.2, and a decision as to whether or not the contract should be brought to an end from the 1st of August 2025, or indeed should we be progressing to seek an extension to the contract for an additional period, in the report referred to as a secondary period hereafter. There's 5 recommendations outlined in section 2 before the Executive Committee today. Section 4 provides some current background to the PPP contract. It confirms that the contract was entered into with Class 98 back in 1998, and it covers 5 schools that are outlined in section 4.1. The Council, outlined in section 4.2, requires to make a decision before the 1st of August 22 if it wishes the contract to expire as of the 1st of August 25, with the Council then taking back the management and operational maintenance and the facility management that are attracted to the schools, or indeed if it wishes to serve an extension notice with Class 98. It's pointed out in section 5.1, when it looks at the timelines and the critical contract details, that the contract will come to an end automatically on the 1st of August 2025 if the Council does nothing, i.e. if the Council does not serve an extension notice to Class 98 by default, then the contract ends on that date. In terms of the secondary period, and looking at section 5.2, it outlines that the current contract highlights a secondary period would be of a 25-year nature. However, in discussions with Class 98 and reflecting on the passage of time, it's reflected, Class 98 have said that there is some flexibility around that. But in terms of the contract itself aligns itself to a secondary period of 25 years. Therefore, moving on to section 5.3 and 5.4, there's 2 options that the Council has here. One is to allow the contract to expire on the 1st of August 2025 and effectively buy back the schools. The second option is to extend the contract referred to the secondary period. Section 5.4 outlines some of the potential benefits of the contract expiry. Some of the things, and it's by no means any particular order, it would mean there's no management fee, therefore added to any future contract, and also there would be no margin. The reference there would be profit attended to it. It also looks at the possibility that the services would then be brought back in-house, in whole or in part. In-house services would be done through the normal 2P transfer requirements, and may offer economies of scale, bringing them into our current contracts, but particularly if you look at catering and cleaning services, there could be economies of scale. And also the attraction there would be that we would make sure the Council makes sure that there's a one-size-fits-all service provision across all the schools within the school estate. Cost certainty is mentioned as well, because if we were going to end the contract in August 25, it would mean that we've got a surety and certainty around that from now, without the discussion around entering into a secondary period, which would mean a discussion of up to possibly 2 years before the price for that secondary period has to be agreed by the 1st of August in 2024. So cost certainty and surety would also be a benefit from that option. The last part in section 5.4 outlines that there's some particular potential procurement challenges with a contract extension. And this probably emanates from the time the contract was set up and the significant changes that have been made to the procurement regulations over that same 22-year period or 23-year period since the contract first started. As everyone knows, there have been quite procurement regulations have evolved quite substantially around framework agreements and tendering, etc. So one of the things that has been flagged up by the working group is that the current contract, if we were going into a secondary period, no matter of what duration, we need to think quite carefully because it could open ourselves up for some particular challenges in that area. Section 5.5 looks at the benefits of a contract extension. Certainly, continuity of service provision would be one benefit, and it would also potentially avoid, if people saw it as a cumbersome mechanism, the right to 2P transfer. So continuity is key there. It would also allow the council to defer the buyback payments, which are within the contract itself. And however, with that, it's also noted that potentially the risk attached to a secondary period may mean that the buyback option, if it's continued, may be of less favourable terms than they are just now, depending on the market conditions around the value of the school sites through a period of time. Turning now to 5.6, it looks at the current revenue position of the contract. The current cost of the contract overall for the council is roughly £18 million a year. There's two elements to that. There's the unitary charges itself, 13.6 million, and the pass-through costs of 4.4 million. There's details given as to what they include in section 5.6. It also points out that currently the council do get a level playing field support from the Scottish Government of around 8.6 million. So going forward, the level playing field support would stop and the council would have £9.4 million to effectively take over the running of the contract within the current cost phase that it operates in just now. And that would include the transfer of the staff if the contract does come to an end under the current 2P rules. The capital position of the contract is outlined in section 5.7, and the payment for the schools is either £5 million, it's the lesser of £5 million, or the current market value of the schools, and the district valuer is undertaking an assessment of these schools to provide that value. The good news is for the council, in terms of a proactive stance, the current capital programme has the £5 million buyback in the capital programme, just in case this was the decision that was made. So proactive, the £5 million already hardwired in to the current council capital programme. In fact, there's 5.6 hardwired in, and that covers some of the ancillary financial legal costs that would be attributable to the contract ending. The staffing matters are referred to earlier on around the 2P transfers. Class 98 have currently estimated that about 95 staff that would fall into that category of being ring-fenced or in scope for 2P transfers. 5.9 covers the areas that those staff are in: catering, cleaning, the janitorial side of it, site supervision and the technical asset management. In terms of the proposals, and I would say here that there's been a working group, a project team set up over the last couple of years actually to look at all the issues around the contract end, and the officers consist of multi-council departments. They also take an account of external representation from the Scottish Futures Trust, who give the government support, and they also support other organisations, mainly the NHS, when it comes to issues and challenges to do with their PPP contracts. The recommendation or the proposal that officers are put and have considered the options here is that we take the option to end the contract on the 1st of August 2025, and that's reflected in the recommendations that are outlined at the start of the report in section 2.1. I'm pleased to say that Mr. Ian Henderson, who's been a catalyst and a support to making sure that we go over some of the legal challenges here, is at the committee today to help me answer any questions if they're of a legal nature. So thank you, convener. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gary. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, convener, and thanks to Gary for outlining the report in a way which leaves very little need to add to. As Gary was mentioning, I know that there's been many officers inputting their expertise in the preparation of the report, and mentioned Ian Henderson. I thank them for their diligence so that we could have this brought forward today. I'm also very happy to move the recommendations within the report, and I think it's welcome that we make this decision today to, in effect, confirm our intention that the PPP contract will come to an end in August 2025, which scarily isn't so far away. There's been a number of benefits which have been highlighted within the report, and Gary has spoken to, not least the benefits which having these assets brought back into operational control will have in financial best value terms, and on which making this decision now and giving the clarity on this will help to mitigate in terms of any potential risk to any future volatility affecting market value should we extend the contract in that period of extension. And that's certainly not an avenue I would wish to see us go down. I think, however, that our communities will welcome very much the operational aspect of being in greater day-to-day control of these facilities without additional layers of consultation and agreement, and how that will enhance opportunities to reflect how to best use these assets more flexibly in line with the needs of our citizens, not only those who routinely use our schools. I don't want to say too much more, as I think the case made in the report is pretty clear. And that what we're being asked to do today is in effect to agree the process to give notice that we're not going to extend the contract. Naturally, the process of how the work progresses to bring the buildings into council ownership and what's been highlighted with the two-way transfer of staff and the operational and legal planning necessary to put things in place is all outlined in the report and will be monitored carefully. And a note within the recommendations that the director will bring back a report on this this time next year, so that we can see the progress on that clearly. So I look forward to seeing those future updates and the matter progressing, and would formally move the recommendations in the report. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. I'm happy to second the recommendations that every local authority in Scotland is watching Falkirk right now as the first PFI contract to be initiated. We're also the first to come forward for that review. So all eyes will be on how we do that, the outcome of today, and how we extricate ourselves if indeed that is what's agreed going forward. I think the project team has worked very hard with Class of 98 on actually getting us to this point, but there's still a fair bit of work still to be done. Irrespective of where we go with regard to the condition of the buildings, and indeed working through the market value of what the buildings will be. Having lived through some of the challenges of the PP contract, and as Councillor Murtagh has said, our communities will welcome the opportunity for regularisation to be able to have access to these particular buildings, which has been challenging over the years as the costs have been prohibitive, and even with the smoothing that has been applied by Falkirk Council in order to give the communities access, that there's still been challenges to that. However, that will then bring in some savings to obviously the council in taking over the running and the management of the buildings, and it's something I would welcome as we look to develop more community access to the facilities within our schools going forward. So I'm more than happy to second this report that gives us the opportunity to bring these schools back into the council estate. I'm going to open it up for any other questions or comments. Siobhan?
Thank you. Yeah. Apologies if I've missed it, and I know it's something that's being alluded to, but do we have an estimated budget for the running costs of the school? Where are we to take it over to be able to compare that to if we were to continue to pay past 95? Just my only reservation would be, were we then responsible for running costs and repair costs? Is that budget going to be protected for the school so that any repairs that might be needed could be carried out in a timely fashion?
Okay, Gary, do you want to maybe take us through that question?
Thanks, Convener. It's a very relevant question. The key aspect of the work that the working group will be doing in the next few months, if the decision is made today, will be to look at the details around it, that surround that. What we're saying just now is that the 9.4 million available budget covers all of these costs just now, and there's nothing to suggest that wouldn't be enough to continue the investment in the schools, the maintenance of it going forward. The idea of traction would be that there's no effectively additional management costs that we would have to fund. So effectively the working group over the next few months, heavily driven by finance input and external input, will be looking just at exactly at that question. Certainly we are doing work just now to look at the staff costs associated with the 2P transfers. That will become relevant in a couple of months' time. And also the key aspect that you alluded to is how the council takes forward its life cycle maintenance of the schools over a set period. And that's an area that, again, the working group, we are certainly well aware of the challenges that we'd put to the council, but equally the working group and those around the table are well up to look and consider the best options possible around those avenues. So at the moment, there's nothing to suggest that the budget that we've got in any way is not sufficient going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Michael Rollo, then James Kerr. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Gary, and everyone for your helpful comments. I think this makes a lot of sense, and happy to support it. I just wanted to give a little insight as a community user of Larbert High School. Our church grew considerably over the last 30 years, and we'd been utilising Larbert High for 10 years. And after lockdown, St. Perrion, who then became Immagill, quadrupled our rent for using that facility. So our rent went up from 7,500 to 30,000, which was a considerable rate. So we now use the town hall once every couple of months, and we're back in our own building for multiple services. So I think, just speaking as a community user, you might have been interested in some of the challenges. But also, we were locked out on occasions, and people forgot to turn up, and especially when we had special events on, that was a bit of a challenge. So I think having it back in the hands of the council for community users like myself would be very welcome. But it's not on that basis. I think it's the basis that you've outlined is very good. I also think it's worth probably asking the question, would we do it again? And in recent years, I haven't seen that happening. So I think that probably answers the question for me as well. Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Michael. James?
I'll be brief, Convener. I'd just like to thank Gary once again for his report, very in-depth report. Similar to Councillor Parsons' question regarding dilapidation costs, will they're not factored into our 9.4 million, obviously, because that's the people who have got the buildings will have to pay that.
Gary?
It's okay. Thanks, Convener. Councillor Kerr again raises a very pertinent question, and if I could just explain to Councillor Kerr and also the committee what's involved here. Effectively, if this was agreed today, both sides, in terms of Class 9T and the council, are undertaking external surveys of the buildings to make sure that both have their own reports around the work that's required to be done between now and August 25 to hand back the buildings in acceptable conditions. What then happens after it is both sides would come together to compare and contrast the key elements to the notes, and from those meetings will come a plan of investment to make sure that between now and August 2025 the buildings are well maintained and investment is made to make sure when we get to August 2025 the buildings are handed back in the acceptable condition that's required.
Thanks, Gary. I think it's key that we get these back in-house. And it's been mentioned about communities. If we want to make these community hubs, and that looks like the future of what Falkirk's trying to achieve, these are key to this happening. My other question, and I don't know if you have it, when does other 4 schools, high schools, come back? I know it's not relevant to the paper, but I'd just like to know. Okay,
again, relevant question, Councillor Kerr. There are 4 schools on a 30-year contract, so we've got quite some time before we discuss that issue. But nonetheless, again, we'll be turning our attention to it once we conclude the recommendations and decisions that are made at committee today.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you, James. Any other questions or comments? We're happy to agree the report. Okay, thank you. Item 7 is our standing item of Early Learning and Childcare 1140 Expansion Plan update, and we're working Gary Greenhorn well today because it's another report by Gary.
As Convener, I'm always delighted to bring these reports, and hopefully this will be almost the end of these reports, so that may please other people as well. Anyway, without further ado, in terms of the report before, the 3 aims are outlined in section 1. There's 4 recommendations for committee to discuss, and that's outlined in section 2. In terms of the main challenges and the main considerations, looking at section 5 now, Convener, there's 5 outstanding projects. They're all in the final stages of completion. The details are given in Appendix 1 to them. And I have to say, Convener, I offer an apology because it was remiss of me. I have excluded the West Quarter primary school plans from it. Wholly remiss of me, and I take responsibility for it. But just to assure members of the committee that the early years expansion plan in terms of increasing capacity at West Quarter is still part of the early years expansion programme and will be aligned to the design work that's going to be attributed when we consider the school expansion plans, which are already in the Council's capital programme. Therefore, Appendix 1 shows some progress on where we are. I'm hoping that at the end of today, the site at Woodburn will be connected to the water supply, which means that they can finalise the work on site very quickly. The current projects are all intended to be completed at some point during the summer to enable us to make sure when they're handed over and they become available for use at the start of the new term. Section 5.2, Convener, provides some fairly interesting statistics. We do, as we've said before, regular reporting to the Improvement Service every quarter. The statistics there reflect the quarter up to the 30th of April 22. A couple of things it shows in Table 1, that effectively we've got 15.4% of our wee people, our young people, in the PVI sector. If you remember at the start of the project, there were some challenges because at that time we're down as low as 8%, and we're trying to get up to around 12%. So we've exceeded that, and 5.4% of our young people are in the private sector. And that reflects some of the blended options that we've offered parents in a flexible manner. Some of the other things I'm very pleased to report are in Table 3 of that section, Convener. And in terms of our measurement against the National Statistics eligible cohort of 3 and 4 year olds, it shows that our occupancy take-up rate is 99.6%. One might argue why we didn't round up to 100%, but we believe in being transparent. So it's 99.6% of 3 and 4 year olds are taking up their offer. I'm also pleased to say that the eligible 2 year old numbers is growing as well. And just on the eligible 2 year olds, 5.3 just outlines some of the challenges that this is giving us. And I would refer back just to say that when we designed and set up some of the capacity for this project, the eligible twos were not a feature in the government aims and aspirations. They've come in throughout the project, and whilst many would welcome it as a positive addition to it, to bring young people in at an earlier age for early intervention reasons alone, the government also extended the eligibility cohort to include care experienced parents as well, which meant the number of throughput of these children was growing. So to do that, what we've got to make sure is got to make sure that we protect capacity, and indeed section 5.3 really aligns it. It's officers, it's essential that officers make sure that where demand for eligible two places is growing, then we make sure we have the capacity, and that may mean realigning some of the capacity for our non-statutory places, i.e. the fee-paying places that we've got, to make sure we protect those rights for eligible 2-year-old children, to support them and their families. 5.4 looks at the budget realignment, and we've mentioned this before. Through a redistribution formula, the council's early years money has been cut. I'm very pleased to say that because of the healthy position at the end of the financial year at 31st of March 22, we've got sufficient revenue funds in place to make sure that we don't have to go big bang and realign this. The option here is that we can do this over a phased manner over a 2-year period. Some of the things that officers are doing in terms of, we're looking at the realignment of capacity to meet local demand. Bear in mind, this is probably the end of the first year when we've got that actual numbers of throughput. We can analyse that on a local base, and Appendix 2 shows some of the changes we intend to make to the operational capacities in some of our earlier settings. Appendix 3 then looks at some of the other changes, mainly again aligned to that demand and capacity realignment, that the changes we're going to make as we go through the course of this year, to make sure that we align it, and by doing so we do it in an efficient manner that reduces our expenditure and tries to bring us back into line to our current budget. 5.5 summarises the national survey that was taken by COSLA and Improvement Service on sustainable rates. The sustainable rate that's been published in terms of the Falkirk, which covers the Forth Valley and the West Lothian under our Regional Improvement Collaborative authorities, shows a sustainable rate for it was identified in the survey of £5.24. A rough breakdown of how that £5.24 is made up is contained within section 5.5. Falkirk's current rate for the private partner nurseries is £5.45, and we said before that in terms of our rate was in terms of an upper quartile of councils in Scotland, to make sure we tried to invest in our private sector as best we can. It is, however, proposed that the Director of Children's Services can, if we're going to review this, these figures were only published fairly recently, and we're just about to enter into discussion with our private nursery partners, and we're going to talk to our Regional Improvement Collaborative local authority partners to see if we can agree some commonality about how we want to change the rate, if at all, aligned to some of the inflationary pressures that the sector's facing. So what they ask here is that the proposal is, if we get that work concluded before the next committee meeting, that the Director under delegated authority can make that decision to amend the rate, subject as always to making sure that we've got the budget available to do so. Section 5.6 confirms that our local serving rate under the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snack Scheme, it was 35.4 pence. Members may recall there was a legal challenge to that, i.e. the local rate, should it be a national rate, and the legal challenge, the outcome of that was that the government have set a national rate across all authorities from the 1st of April this year of 58.2 pence. That benefits all our daycare childcare providers, and it's the early learning and childcare team at the centre that have got to do the administration for that. To put it in perspective, the current estimated grant for the next year is £419,000. So that shows you additional monies that will be put in to make sure that our young people, our wee people in these settings get effectively the milk and the healthy snacks that they want, to make sure that the providers also have the funds to do that properly. It also says that for doing that, we get an administration fee of £10,000. Also pleased to report that in section 5.7, over the last couple of months, the early years team again have, in terms of the government's own initiative, awarded 34 grants totalling just over £103,000 to local childcare providers to get them back on their feet following the pandemic. Again, good news of investment in the local economy. Further to section 5.8, it looks at the consultation that was undertaken for the delivery of early learning and childcare. Just to remind members that we're required under the current duties and guidance to undertake a consultation every 2 years. The current consultation was delayed because of the COVID pandemic. However, we concluded it in March this year, and I'm pleased to say that there was a healthy response to the survey. I'm also pleased to say that the majority of the respondees to the survey summarised that they were very pleased with Falkirk's provision, and everyone, especially this committee that supported the work over the last 28 reports, can take credit for that as well, and we're pleased to endorse that. There's 7 key messages outlined in section 5.8, and overall full details of the consultation are appended at Appendix 4. I'm also very pleased, convener, to say in section 5.9 we've concluded the work around our cost boundary arrangements with local authority, our neighbouring local authorities, and this will mean that parents in Falkirk can put their children into, if they so wish, to establishments in Clackmannan or Stirling, and there'll be at no extra cost. And equally, at no extra cost means that there is no bills being passed from each council to another. That reduces bureaucracy and keeps the administration as tight as we possibly can. I'd have to say the numbers in this are not great, however, it gives parents the flexibility across all the neighbouring authorities within our Regional Improvement Collaborative. Coming very quickly just to the current financial position, I mentioned earlier on the positive position at the end of the year in terms of the revenue. We're about £1.9 million underspent on our ring-fenced revenue grant, and just to reiterate to members that are new to the committee, the ring-fenced grant continues into the current financial year also. The capital position at the end of the year we've got just over £1 million left within our capital funds to conclude the final phases in transition and the costs associated with the current small number of projects that are outstanding. In terms of the rest of the report, it's probably the same as previous reports, convener, so I'm going to pause there and I'm happy to answer any questions that arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, convener, and again thanks to Gary for his report. I'm not sure if he's looking at another year older since the last time I saw him when he was giving the details of this, but if so, my best wishes to him. It has been a long journey, and I don't think we're quite at the finish line yet, but I'd certainly open with my continued appreciation of the level of work for the whole team that it's taken to realise that, which has been completely transformational change across the service to deliver 1140 hours and in facilities that not only meet the needs of our wee people, as Gary was referring to, and we've come to regularly refer to our children at committee as, but giving them those nurturing and inspiring venues and places where our very valuable staff can use their professional expertise to set our citizens for the future to their positive pathways and to enhance their successful pathway on for learning and their well-being. I know we'll all be anxious to see that Appendix 1 empty of projects still to be completed, and that it's been a very challenging year for many reasons. I know that was spoken about in this morning's executive also, the circumstances to which we face. So I'd again like to thank staff for their perseverance and their adaptability in the face of difficulties, and that determination to provide and plan for contingencies to ensure minimum disruption to staff and to our wee people. Let's hope that we don't face any more delays, but I know that the team are up for that challenge as well, and well into planning of contingencies. I'm happy to move the recommendations, convener, which I think they are mostly for noting, but I think it's important that this update continues to come to committee I can't remember the number that Gary was saying. It seems a very high number of reports that have come in, and perhaps this will be one of the last. But I think it's here for the right reasons, and it's certainly been a journey which we've all been invested in and looking forward to coming to an end. So I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report and thank Gary for the detail that's been outlined in summarising it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. And thank you to Gary, the second most important Gary in the Council. But we might mention that. Gary, although I wasn't on the Young Person Education Committee the last time, we've had obviously a good bit of involvement with this within my own ward and seeing things happening there. You're fighting through to the finish on this. I know there's been problems with getting switch gears in from Europe, which took the Northern an out of time. Then when you get them in, where the cables have been ran didn't match up, and I know again you had problems with national facility suppliers at that time. So I congratulate you on staying with it. I know there's been a number of tasks. I know we've got 5 more to go. It'd be great to see them all in, because when you actually see the benefits that the kids get from this, I know the one at Kinnaird, they rave about it. I think just won an award for something as well, if I seem to remember rightly. And when you're getting kids at that young, enjoying the early education, it's just fantastic. And let's get everybody, get them all enjoying them. I'm happy to second Councillor Murtagh.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. I'll open up for any comment or questions. Siobhan?
Yeah, just a comment. Of course, no one would argue that these aren't all positive moves, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention in this meeting the sustainability and environmental impact. I know that a lot of these decisions have already been taken. However, in the interest of putting focus on the climate crisis, moving forward with the reports, I would be really hoping for something a bit more substantial in the reports, just for transparency and to give us all a better level of understanding of how we could perhaps mitigate some of the impacts that we are making.
Okay, Robert, you were at the exec this morning, and obviously there's a recurring theme there. Whether you maybe want to come in and comment on that?
Just to say that the point is duly noted. As we move forward, I think we can probably do much better in terms of reports that are about infrastructure, new builds, the heating systems that we're going to be putting in. So I see us being able to move quite quickly in terms of providing better information for members regarding capital spend. I think we've got to collectively put our thinking hats on a little bit in terms of what we will do when we're talking about revenue spend, but that's something that even following this morning's meeting, directors have already conferred on how we might begin to improve what is contained in future reports.
Okay, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Siobhan. James?
Thanks, Convener. I'll be as quick as possible. If Gary alluded to at the beginning about West Quarter, if he can just contact myself, Anne and Gordon with relevant plans going forward, and the statutory requirement regarding the child places. You know, I've been banging on about this for the last 5 years, and the people who pay are losing out sometimes because statutory requirements for people who didn't pay, they take the places. These people who are paying are having to give jobs up because they can't get their children watched. So I just want us to be mindful of that, and I'm sure Robert and yourself, Gary, are mindful. I've mentioned for the last 5 years, and it's important for the areas that lie out with the town centres. So thanks, Gary. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thanks, James. I don't know whether Robert or Gary want to come in around the statutory places. I know that there's been further discussions in relation to that, and being able to accommodate those that pay with alternatives.
I'm happy to come in, convener, and Councillor Kerr's comments, I'd have to say, summarise the challenges that we're grappling with as we go through this increase in demand from some of the 2-year-olds. What we have got is we have got private provision. We are trying to increase the number of childminders we bring in as well. So it's a fine balance, but equally we've got to recognise that there are rural areas and make sure that when we're doing things we still recognise that the rural challenges that some areas of Falkirk have. So again, we're not saying we've got it perfectly correct, but we are constantly trying to juggle demand and supply, especially at a local level. The data is improving every day, that we get more and more data to enable us to make better decisions. We've not got it right, but I will certainly, Councillor Kerr, I totally agree with Councillor Kerr's comments. So I've got to just fine tune the balance to try to get the most appropriate, best fit going forward, and that's what we strive every day to try and do. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question about the long term. As we say, we're coming to the end of particularly the infrastructure and the new build. And it's about our long term strategy for early years, and looking at where that now goes once that infrastructure and expansion is completed. So that we can make sure that that's aligned and we can get the benefits of that, and just where we are and looking at plans for the future on that.
If I could come in there, convener, I think we are at the stage of the end of the infrastructure expansion. As Gary's mentioned, we are currently reviewing the various different attendance patterns and the offers that we have on a ward by ward basis. Moving forward, I think the question that everybody wants to be able to answer is what impact has the expansion of early years had on attainment? What impact will it or is it having on closing of the attainment gap? So once we are more embedded, and once we've got a number of cohorts that are passing not just from early years into the early stages of primary school, in the next 2 or 3 years we will be able to hopefully compare the performance of a cohort of primary 4s 4 years ago with a cohort of primary 4s now, and hopefully begin to have some kind of evidence base of the impact in terms of attainment, but also possibly some impact in terms of socialisation and child development data that will come to us from other sources such as the health service. So these are the kind of next phases of what will be included in our longer term strategy for early years.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, if there are no further questions, are we happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. Item 8 is the review of the All Schools management, and again that's with Gary.
It is. Thanks very much indeed, convener. I'll try to be quick with this one. The 4 aims outlined in section 1 of the report, and there's 4 recommendations for the consideration at the Executive Committee today. Section 4 in the report provides some background to the summary of how DSM has evolved, and it's linked to key government consultations and government policies over the years. There's an embedded link that shows you, if you wanted to look at it, the guidance. The guidance itself has been attached to 2 previous reports that we've considered at this committee over the last couple of years. The considerations set out in section 5, again, just reiterate the principles of DSM. It's very much linked to the fair funding review, and no one can argue that in any concept that we're trying to take forward, we want to be simple, we want to be transparent, we want to deliver value for money, and there's got to be accountability and responsibility attached to it. So some of these things that feature in it would come as no surprise to anyone that's looking at an ordinarily strategic business model to try to move things forward in a similar manner. Section 5.5, it confirms to the committee that over the last few months that there's been 2 DSM review groups set up. One looking at early years and primary, and one looking specifically at secondary. The membership of the group is outlined in section 5.6, but they have covered head teachers, heads of establishments, and support from other departments and officers from other services as well. The groups have done a couple of things, and I suppose here is that whilst the duty is on us to review it, that is what we have done. However, in reviewing it doesn't mean that if things aren't broken, then we're required to change them, and that's come up a lot of it. And I would just refer to the guidance itself, convener, and as much as there was good examples set out in the guidance, and Falkirk Council had the most examples of best practice set out in the guidance when it was published, compared to any other authority. We featured very heavily in the good practice guidance. So what we're trying to do is take forward that and embed it in how we take things forward. So what the groups tried to do was to look at areas where we're going to review things, and indeed we have undertaken a number of areas where we have made some changes through common agreement, and these changes have been implemented. We've also made some recommendations around where there's things that aren't broken just now and they're working, but in the fullness of time we may be able to do it either in a better format, we may be able to improve processes, we may be able to streamline things and actually cut workload and bureaucracy down for people in schools and at the centre. So with that in mind, there are a couple of appendices that are tables that are attached to the report. The first report, the first table in section 5.10 outlines 7 areas where agreement has been reached and the school sectors and when it's been implemented from. Some of these areas of agreement are only one sentence, but what lies behind it is a myriad of probably quite a lot of operational and technical detail, which is not in the report. That will feature in our DSM manual, which will be available after the summer holidays. But nonetheless, it gives the committee a flavour for some of the areas we have reached common agreement on. And again, when you review things, it's very pleasing to say, albeit it does give the working group some extra work, that there's some commonality of agreement to say this isn't broken just now, but let's look at how we can improve things going forward. So in 5.12 there's a table containing 10 areas that we will take forward over the course of the next year to further review our DSM scheme. For those of you that are maybe long in the tooth like myself, when people refer to DSM schemes in local councils, the common added is that it's always under review. And that's a good thing because it offers a continual change, continual improvement in systems to see if we can make them better. And we're actually all up for that. And it chimes with very much some of the outcomes of the best value audit report and what we're trying to strive to do within Falkirk Council. So I'm very pleased to say that certainly it will give us extra work, but there's 10 things outlined in section 5.12 where we will continue to do this over the course of the next year. Just to confirm that the ELC establishments, they were omitted from it because effectively we did the self-same exercise when we were rolling out the early years expansion programme, where we looked at how we staff the establishments. So we brought a lot of these reports back to the executives. So effectively we carried out a DSM review without embedding it into the groups because we did the core objectives were done throughout the last 4 years of that expansion programme. And just to point out that special schools and early and education establishments like to ASN, they're very unique in nature, and we will continue to review them on an annual basis, linked to role, capacity, and indeed linked also to the individual needs of individual pupils. All of that has to be taken into account before we put the resources that are very much required in these establishments in place. They're very much individual, and the aim is to retain that individuality of resource allocation, provided we do so within the resources that we currently have. So that's it from me, convener. I'm very pleased to say that we've done the review. There is more work to be done, but it does confirm that, as the government asked, we would conclude the review, and the recommendations are outlined in section 2 for consideration today. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. Gary's certainly been putting through his pace today. Happy to see that the information again contained within the report and the outputs from the two review groups in terms of the current and the future work and future development to the devolved school management scheme that's contained within it. And as Gary mentioned, there'll be further detail that the members can look at once the details is published in August. Also that we, ask the director to undertake a review of the DSM arrangements on a 3-yearly basis to align with the best practice in the National Framework Guidelines, which again I think is a fairly self-explanatory move and an easy recommendation to agree to. Gary mentioned about the continuous review, and I don't think we need the last 2 years to teach us how quickly things change and operational landscapes can change, and it's right that we should be regularly reviewing those arrangements, and some of the detail even which is outlined in the report is very welcome to see, and look forward to seeing how that progresses. I don't have much more to say on that. I think the detail's been covered very comprehensively by Gary, so I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh, and I'll go to Councillor Garner.
Happy to second.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I was expecting them to say something else. I will open it up to any questions or comments. I appreciate DSM might be quite alien to particularly new members. I've seen DSM evolve over the last 15 years. And Gary knows that it's always a go-to to ask questions at budget time about how it's used, how it's spent, and it's undergone a complete overhaul in the last few years, making it far more transparent than it's ever been in the past. And I think that's been challenging for both sides, but that's where we are. James, you wanted to ask?
Just a quick, probably not a question, Convener. I think it would be remiss of me. This is the only opportunity I've had to say this. So we're losing 2 head teachers that in my schools, Stephen Fee for St Mungo's and Leslie Carroll for Graham High, and the dedication and commitment that these 2 head teachers have shown their years Falkirk Council has been phenomenal. We've already lost Keith Webster for Falkirk High a couple of years ago or a year ago, and I just wish whoever their successors are that they can deliver the same quality education that these head teachers have done. Sorry, it's not a question for the DSM, but I wasn't going to get a chance to say that in the next report. So thanks, Convener, for your indulgence.
Okay, I'll let you away with that this time, James. Indeed, and I think that having reached the best attainment ever level throughout our schools cohort over the last year, despite the impacts of COVID, is tribute to the staff, the teachers, the parents, pupils, and I would like to think that will continue, and we'll continue to raise the bar going forward so that we can be the best that we can be across the piece. If there's no further questions in relation to DSM, we'll be happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
Convener, can I just add as well, just to say that we will be doing a member induction session to DSM at the start of the new term. So it's open to all members, and hopefully the mistakes of DSM, as you alluded to, will be made a bit more transparent, especially to the new members, because it was raised at the very helpful induction sessions that we had with the new members. Thank you.
And I'm sure some of the longer standing members will want to get involved in that as well. Okay, thank you for that. Final item is item 9, and it's asset surplus to operational requirements. And I think it's back with yourself again, Gary.
It is. I'm on a roll, Convener. Hopefully this will be quick. Thank you. In summary, this paper highlights 4 properties where a decision to close them has already been made. This is outlined in section 4.1. The council's existing process, I'm saying the existing process, requests that when it happens, the appropriate director confirms after a review of these properties that these properties are no longer required for operational purposes. This paper confirms that the 4 properties outlined in section 5.1 of the report are indeed surplus to Children's Services operational requirements. What this means, if this paper is agreed, is that these properties are then transferred effectively to the Council's asset team to consider disposal options as outlined in section 4.2. Therefore, the recommendations before the Executive Committee today in 2.1 is to agree that these properties are surplus to Children's Services operational requirements. The appendices contained in the report show the maps and site plans of the properties involved, and I'm happy to take any questions, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Convener. I think I might be an asset surplus to requirements in a minute if we're trying into meeting. I think it is the last report of the day. I'm very pleased to see it come forward. Obviously, this decision is relating to the buildings themselves rather than the services for which they were used, and those decisions have already been made, as been highlighted in the report. So there isn't an awful lot more to say on that, but clearly it's a fairly straightforward matter to move these buildings to the next stage, being no longer required by the service in Children's Services, and that then they can be looked at in the overall council asset management process, and including options towards disposal of assets if that's the direction it goes. So happy to see this move to the next stage, and to move the recommendations in the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. I'm happy to second the recommendations. This will then go into the strategic property review, and that's going to come back to members for a future report, and that will detail what use these buildings may well be or otherwise in the future as we go forward. So I think it's a fairly straightforward report. So I'll open it up to any questions or comments. No, has it got kind of too hot and sticky in here for everybody?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Just ignores me now. Gary, slightly confused on the paper, to be honest with you. We've got Larbert Day Nursery, which actually I thought with the work done at Inchleah, and to be honest, great credit to you, the meeting you did at Stenhousemuir Primary School, I thought that was already noted to go there. And then probably more importantly, there's a building in Grangemouth called Sealock House, which is not on here, and it was taking out the heads of service and director. How many people are actually using it, and could that be sped up? So because obviously it could be a good asset to dispose of and get revenue into the council.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Bowes. Just to say that you're absolutely correct. The decision was already made to close Larbert Day once the amalgamated site at Inchleah came in. Unfortunately, the council's current process says that over and above that, there's a final check that the director's got to bring a further report to confirm that he's looked at the assets again and declare them surplus to operational requirements. I'm sure that current process would be up to be re-examined in terms of the new directorate place, because we've had those similar conversations. So really, this is a report that just reflects the current process that we've got in the council to go through. But nonetheless, those decisions of closure, as you rightly said earlier on, were taken at an earlier meeting to close Larbert Day, as you referred to. The second part of your question around Sealock House. Sealock House, unfortunately, isn't on the Children's Services portfolio. It is an operational asset to the council, because Children's Services pay effectively a rent to the council for the use of Sealock House. But certainly when the new accommodation at the Falkirk Stadium becomes online, then certainly at that moment the Children's Services staff will transfer over to the Falkirk Stadium, and at that point the asset, I would imagine, would be subject to the council's asset team to consider further options thereafter. The current dates for that move to the stadium, in line with the agreed processes, are probably at the end of this calendar year or at the start of the next calendar year. That's the indicative date. The work is already ongoing in terms of the planning and design, and some of the fit out of the stadium is in place already.
Sorry, can I follow up? So Gary, just very short one. I'd said about the number of people working there, except obviously the head of service and director. You might not be have that to hand just now. If you could maybe follow up with that.
I can give you that information. Certainly, I'll send you an email about that, Councillor Bowes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moody wants to come in because he thinks that there's maybe some way we can maybe look at improving this process.
Yeah, I think it's just to pick up on the point that Gary was making. There probably is a way of streamlining this so that everyone can make decisions that we can look at the question of whether we can draw in the decision we're actually being asked to make today at the same time, so that we're not duplicating processes. So that will certainly be looked at the next time we're reviewing the standing orders and scheme of delegation.
Okay, thank you for that, Colin. In which case, are we content to agree the report? Okay, thank you for that. And it's been a long day, but thank you for everybody for bearing with it. It is getting a bit warm in this room as the sun's come round, but it brings our Education, Children and Young People's Executive to an end, and I can all release you out for some fresh air and some sunshine. Thank you very much for your attendance.